welcome to FO Live. With me are two eminent guests. We have someone from Osaka, none other than Professor Haruko Sato, whom you heard in our previous edition. It was actually FO Talks, not FO Live. Haruko and I spoke about how the Quad should turn into a quintet. And today we are joined, Jae-Woo Chung, professor in Korea, joins us to discuss how South Korea, or rather can South Korea, be useful to the Quad. Welcome, Jae-Woo, and welcome back, Haruko.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So today we have a very interesting few minutes ahead. In our last discussion, Haruko and I talked about the Quad. And the Quad is the US, the Quad is Australia, Japan, and India in a grouping of four. That's why the quadrilateral, the Quad. And it was the idea of Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. The idea was containment of China. And if some people are uncomfortable with that term, especially diplomats in these four countries, we can use the word concern about China. Of course, Quad has had its limitations, partly because the US has global priorities and Asia sometimes slips down the pecking order, notwithstanding the Asia pivot, which Barack Obama, or rather then President Barack Obama, announced. Australia, of course, has a complicated relationship with China. They rely on their earnings. For the Chinese, they export commodities to China. Japan also has a tight trading partnership with China, but lives under the security umbrella of the US. However, Japan has concerns too, especially given recent developments, a more assertive Chinese foreign policy, aggressive claims on disputed islands, and, of course, who can forget that a joint Russian and Chinese fleet circumnavigated the main island of Japan, Honshu. So Japan has its concerns, and India, which has a long border with China, which had a border clash with China, and had tensions from 2020 to 2021, and still has tensions. And India, of course, is 1.4 billion people in different directions and seeking to have its strategic autonomy. And so the Quad has, in some ways, become something of a talking shop, lacks coherence, and South Korea, which is a very important player in Asia, in fact, in the world. After all, who can forget that the biggest shipyards now are in Busan? They are no longer in Glasgow or elsewhere. Who can forget that South Korean chaebols manufacture mobile phones and, of course, many other things? So, powerful, dynamic economy with the border with North Korea, with proximity to China, and with a close security relationship with the US. And so it makes sense that the Quad should have South Korea in some ways. That was the topic of our discussion last time. And after this lengthy introduction, I'm going to ask first Jae-Woo, and then, of course, Haruko will chime in. Why do you think South Korea was not invited at the Quad's inception? South Korea is indubitably important. It's extraordinarily dynamic. So why did, say, Shinzo Abe and co. leave South Korea out?
I think at the time when Prime Minister Shinzo Abe first delivered the idea or the notion of the arc of freedom and democracy back in 2007, at the parliamentary in India, I don't think he had a clear idea as to, how that notion is going to evolve with regional players. At the time, I think his focus was on the rather as evident in the name per se, Quad, 4 countries, and he had probably impression of his own that the strategic pivot nations should be located in 4 points, and he presented his ideas in a diagram as a diamond, and I think that naturally excluded some of the important regional players back then. But as the idea had evolved since then, and coming to his second term, then he came up with a much clearer idea as to how he's going to implement or materialize the notion of Quad. And then he even took a step further by toying with the notion of Quad Plus after a series of round discussions with Quad leaders. And I don't think any government documents were revealed on this progress, but we can, by circumstantial evidences, that Quad would be not enough to be the foundation of the Indo-Pacific strategy, with the exclusion of some of the important regional players. And I think that's how we got to this point whereby we try to expand that idea of Quad to Quad Plus. That was my take. Yeah.
I see. So what you're saying is that at that time, he thought of the big powers and different directions, and chose Australia and the US, the Anglo-Saxon powers, and chose India because of its size, and Japan, of course, but missed out on, say, smaller powers like South Korea and perhaps even the Philippines, because after all, a free Indo-Pacific, open to trade, without security concerns, is the aim of almost all Asian countries. And ASEAN has in some ways been a resounding success because there have been no big wars in the region for a while now. So given that, the fact that happened then, and now we are talking about Quad Plus, Haruko, we use the word quintet. Where do we go next? What should the Quad become, Quad Plus or quintet? Why do we need South Korea in? What are South Korea's strengths and weaknesses? First you, Haruko, and then Jay, please.
I am supposed to be speaking about South Korea's strengths and weaknesses.
You bring the outsider's objectivity, and then, of course, Jamu will bring the insider's insight.
I think so. In the previous talk with you, Atul, I think we sort of landed on the idea that the exclusion of South Korea doesn't make Quad attractive to anybody, partly because as the differences that we spoke about, and also about the very different and then disparate group of countries coming together, regardless of what Prime Minister Abe thought in perhaps, as Jay-Woo just said, more like a geographical term, the big diamond, which I also mentioned yesterday. But I think if we're looking at the Quad from, for example, the viewpoint of Southeast Asia, which obviously is bang in the middle of this diamond, then I think from their experience, particularly in the past 3 decades or so, it makes more sense that Korea and Japan are represented in there together, because what we said, Jae-woo, last time was, I said, at least these two countries do things and get things done, whether they're infrastructure projects or capacity building, peace building, and generally sort of economic development assistance. And so at least from the Southeast Asian perspective, these are the two Asian countries that make sense for them to work together. So in that sense, I think...
Very quickly, if I can add to what you're saying, China has been building infrastructure projects in a large way in all of Southeast Asia, Indonesia, any country, actually. And the only two countries which have the ability to build infrastructure at speed and scale are South Koreans and the Japanese. And in fact, the Japanese are building a bullet train in India from Mumbai to Ahmedabad, which is Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's pet project. And that sort of expertise is invaluable for countries which are beginning from a low base and need the multiplier effect of infrastructure. Please, Haruko, carry on.
Well, I think it's just that, if we're looking at it in the context of, or the image of the Quad as I said, a talking shop, I think it's very important that it gives off the image of doing things, accomplishing things, being able to deliver. And for example, Japan and Australia do not have necessarily the experience of working together to deliver something. And if anything, as you said, their policies, foreign policies, and their sort of strategic trajectory towards Southeast Asia or Asia as a whole is very, very different in terms of how. But South Korea and Japan have very similar overlapping interests, particularly when it comes to maintaining in the FOWIP framework, but good relations with Southeast Asia. So in that sense, I'm just sort of wondering, I've been wondering since day one about why would even Prime Minister Abe not consult or even, put South Korea in the purview of anything that he was going to do in terms of the Quad. So the Quad Plus, of course, was probably the natural progression. But starting off with these 4 members, I think it was perhaps diplomatically not a very effective thing to do.
Interesting.
Yes.
Thank you. Strengths and weaknesses, please, of South Korea.
Yeah, I think I like to first give my own take on the meaning of the Quad. I mean, I read the script, and I think, as Haruko mentioned, and you too also mentioned, that it's a talking shop at this stage. It may look like it that way, but at the same time, I think this is where I like to build my narratives. I think the Quad is the foundation of the very basis of the Indo-Pacific strategy. I think the core members of the Indo-Pacific strategy lies in India, the United States, Australia, and Japan. And I think that also, that was projected to even in geographical terms, drawing the boundaries of the, Indo-Pacific strategy. So I think the Quad per se has 2 meanings. One is core membership and the main actors, and that's where the leadership lies. and also at the same time the geographical concept of the Indo-Pacific strategy. So I think this is where I value the notion of Quad when it was introduced and reintroduced in 2017. And as the Quad was, projected into Indo-Pacific strategy, I think this is where we can find the position and the role that South Korea could be found. And I think the strength of South Korea could be manifold. One salient strength is it is one of the strongest and biggest military allies of the United States in this region. And we're talking about 500,000 soldiers with sophisticated weaponries and annual military exercises that have been going up between the two countries for the past 70 years. And now we have nuclear ties with the United States. And I think this is what makes South Korea a, member country of the Quad or Indo-Pacific strategy, regardless of our will and position, by default. The U.S. and Korea alliance has remained solid past 70 years. It is a linchpin in the American alliance system. And the United States, I would dare to say, cannot really achieve its military goals without the ROK-US alliance in this region. Because we all know that Japan's self-defense forces is prevented to help the United States overseas by law and constitution. Australia is too far off, and Australian military strength is only 1/10 of South Korea's. And I don't think India is committed to, just like you pointed out, I don't think it's yet militarily committed to the United States' pursuit of its own strategic interest in this region.
Now, well, India, sorry to interrupt, India probably doesn't even know very clearly what are its national interests. It's 1.4 billion people. There are so many competing voices, contending narratives, and institutions pulling in different directions. I mean, just to give you an example, there are a lot of people in the military who want a more hawkish policy on China. And then you have the Indian Foreign Service, which comes through the civil services examination. And they want a détente with China. Similarly, you have people who want a more aggressive policy with Pakistan. And then you have others who say, well, we should be generous and magnanimous and let things go. And we have a very tortured relationship with the US, partly because the Democratic Party and, of course, the left-leaning establishment in the US feels that India is ruled by a Hindu fascist / Hindu supremacist, a term that harks back to white supremacism. Party, the Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP, and of course, here in India, the BJP and its parent organization, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, feels that the Democrats in general, and perhaps Kamala Harris in particular, are extremely left-leaning and woke, and they are planning a regime change a la Ukraine. So India is complicated, to say the least.
We are as complicated and as diverse as India when it comes to public opinion and, political circles here. And I like to move on from the military perspective to economic perspective. And although it might not, my argument wouldn't be exactly applied to, the argument that I'm going to the current situation of the Quad in terms of global supply chain, but barring the idea of minilateralism, that is very much pertain to the notion of Quad, and I think the United States is it has expressed its own interest in minilateralism as evident in the notion of Quad that it supports. And you look at the global supply chain, and the core members of the United States led global supply resilience scheme. Korea is one of the most critical actors in that scheme too.
And to give a practical example, if Busan stopped making ships, the entire global trade will suffer immediately.
Yeah,
and similarly, South Korea may not be as important when it comes to semiconductors, but still, if South Korea's semiconductor production is affected, then goodbye to your Samsung fridges.
Exactly. So that was my next point I was going to make, and and Haruko might understand this better than I do. And you look at the semiconductor global supply chain. The technology is transferred from the United States, and parts and plants and all these facilities are coming from Japan, and we are the main manufacturer, and we supply the final products of semiconductors to the world market. And I think when it comes to memory chips, South Korean products occupies more than 60% of the market. And when it comes to electric vehicle batteries, as we supply 40% of the world market, and the rest is coming from.
Let me stop you. 14% electric vehicle batteries. 40.
Yeah,
that's
40.
Extraordinary. I hadn't studied percentages, and my estimation was lower. So I'm surprised and impressed, and I'm educated now.
Yeah, more than 40% comes from South Korean companies, and the rest comes from Chinese suppliers. Yeah. And so when Biden administration introduced the Inflation Reduction Act, we should have welcomed that, discriminatory act against Chinese.
It's protectionism. It is the complete opposite of Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Exactly.
Protectionism even against your own allies.
Exactly. But it would be a tremendous. South Korea would be a tremendous beneficiary from the IRA, because it discriminates against Chinese products, and which means that the world market can only use or adapt to Korean products, especially those electric vehicles.
Great. So it's great for you. I was under the impression it might not be great for you, but it's great for you. It's not so great for Germany.
Exactly. But unfortunately, it was taken the other way around in South Korea. And we could go on and about this global supply resilience scheme of the United States. And I think there are a few other examples, but I'll stop at that. And you look at these examples, and South Korea is naturally one of the critical actors in this scheme. And by default here, we all think South Korea is a de facto member of the Quad, Indo-Pacific Strategy, Quint, or whatever you name it. And in general, in America's global supply resilience, scheme, you cannot discount South Korea here.
In a nutshell, South Korea is an extremely important actor in the global economy. It is critical to global supply chains. It manufactures a lot of goods that are fundamental to the modern economy. And therefore, South Korea is not just a regional player, not just an Asian player, but a global player. And therefore, has a very good case to be included in the quintet. Or Quad Plus, or whatever else you want to call it. Haruko, would you like to add to what Jim has just said?
Not really, but I just wanted to, this is not to add per se to what Jae-woo said, but it's just a quick reminder when it comes to semiconductors and the American sort of strategy that policies towards it that it's taken recently, whether it's Taiwan or towards Korea. Japan has a very, very sore memory about semiconductors because in the 80s, the United States gutted our semiconductor manufacturing industry because we were too competitive.
I see. How did they do it?
How did they do it? Well, basically, they were, it comes to the Japanese semiconductor war was basically, this was a pattern. It fits in the similar types of trade measures that the United States took, which is to put a lot of tariffs, so not to make it competitive. It's, very few people, the younger generation, don't really know, but the Japanese put self-imposed tariffs on Japanese car exports because it was too competitive. So going back and being told recently, it said, okay, Japan, start making semiconductors again. It was sort of like, excuse me. But luckily, because Korea grew into a time in a different sort of time scale, but it came in and was able to somewhat take that position that the Japanese were kicked out of, not by Korea, but by the United States. So I'm not saying that it's all bad, but it's just that the Japanese do have a memory about this. And the semiconductor thing to certain generations just sounded too ironic, convenient. But that's just a little trivia that I just wanted to add.
So now that you mentioned that, let's take a detour and go down memory lane. 1993, a movie came out called Rising Sun.
Yeah.
It had Sean Connery and Wesley Snipes. And if you see that movie, you'd think that Japan was the big challenger to the US. The Japanese economy really threatened the US economy at that time. Sony, Toyota, and various other Japanese companies had mastered manufacturing. And of course, we know that never transpired. The Japanese economic bubble burst. There was a time when a tiny amount of land in Tokyo was valued more than apparently all the land in California. That's obviously insane. And Japan has limped along since. Japan has never recovered its mojo. And we've had quantitative easing. We've had all sorts of fiscal and monetary measures. Less fiscal, actually fiscal too. But the point is, the bottom line is that now the big bogey is China. Now, of course, the US is focused on China, decided that China should be shut off from access to high technology, especially semiconductor technology. China should be put back in its box. And to do so, it needs South and it needs Japan. Of course, it also thinks it needs Australia. That's why the Anglo-Saxon AUKUS deal is back. The English-speaking peoples of Winston Churchill have gotten back in the club. And of course, back in the day, Indians provided troops. In fact, Lord Elgin II, Lord Elgin I, took the Elgin marbles to London, and they lie in resplendent glory in the British Museum. And Lord Elgin II, his son, sacked the Summer Palace in Beijing. Many of his troops were Indian. And the joke is that the Anglo-Saxons want the Indians to act as sepoys and smash the Chinese yet again. So, in a way, the US needs these Asian powers to balance China. And China is no saint. China has been extremely aggressive in South China Sea and East China Sea. China has bullied its neighbors. China has also stolen intellectual property. China has been particularly aggressive using its economic leverage to extract a political price. All of that is true. But what is also true is that perhaps the quintet, and I'd like your view on it, is the classic extension of the US alliance building to further its own strategic interests, even though I know it was originally Shinzo Abe's idea.
Yeah, I think that'll be really inevitable, particularly in this region, because, like I said, you look at the portfolios of the military strength in this region, especially in the context of going against China. Everybody's just outnumbered, outforced, outstrength against China. So we need a collective effort if you're to preserve so-called, liberal international order in this region. And
therefore South Korea and Japan and Australia and India need the US for a free Indo-Pacific.
Yes, exactly. And still, I don't think that, forces from Australia, the Philippines, or even some Southeast Asian countries are not sufficient enough to help the causes that the United States is pursuing in this region, especially in terms of its military schemes against China. So it definitely needs someone with a much stronger forces, military portfolios like India, Japan, South Korea, and so forth. And so I think that's one concern the United States has. And that's why I said, it would be quite inevitable for these regions to be part of this containment scheme against China of the United States.
So Japan has increased its defense budget from 1 to 2% of its GDP, and that'll happen over 5 years.
It will. Not yet.
It will. Okay. And you're buying Tomahawk missiles. You are at the cutting edge in many technologies. South Korea, of course, has North Korea at its border. South Korea has a well-trained military and high spending on defense. And so, do you think that eventually what will include South Korea become a quintet and morph into some sort of military alliance?
I think that'll be also inevitable, because that's going to be the foundation of this whole scheme. And based on this premises that we can expect to go for economic cooperation and cooperation for, non-security issues, non-traditional security issues. Like pointed out in the script, climate change and everything else. But everything
that will be an add-on, but the fundamental bedrock eventually you think is going to be military.
Yeah, that's right. Without that security assurance, I don't think the regional players would be willing and could be act at its own will to pursue cooperation with the United States on these sensitive issues. These issues are really very closely pertain to their own national interests, but at the same time, there's a conflicting and overlapping interest that is very much shared with China. So without that, security guarantee or assurance, I don't think we'll have a sense of security to go on with the United States, despite our desire to preserve, liberal international order in this region.
Let me ask both of you a question. The U.S. has interests in the Middle East. We know it has a six fleet jumped off Lebanon to control Hezbollah. The U.S. is backing Ukraine in the Russia-Ukraine war. The U.S. is clearly, according to many geopolitical analysts, John Mearsheimer included, overextended. Can Seoul and Tokyo rely on the U.S.?
Should I go first?
Yeah, I was you.
Just going back a bit about what Jay Wu was talking about, the inevitability of the Quad or the Quin turning in or basically having a military dimension and being a sort of the foundation of at least a security order or architecture that this region so lacks. I very much agree that that is reality. And I also agree that that is the way, for example, at least the DOD in the United States would see it. But at the moment,
Pentagon would like it to be a military alliance, maybe NATO-like for Asia.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's NATO-light, but at least that's the realistic policy that actually going back to can we rely on the United States, that we want America to be thinking about seriously. That the military security dimension really needs to be considered, and I'm sure it is a high priority now that because it's not just conventional military issues, right? We're now facing China's nuclear arsenal that is a serious concern. So the United States, even as a nuclear power, has to contend with two hostile powers who might join forces with their nuclear arsenal. So I think in that sense, in the long-term sort of power politics dimension, I think it's very, very important that the United States demonstrates the foresight and the willingness to plan, or rather at least to think of the Quad and plus that way. I think that is a given. Nonetheless, when it comes to China, particularly the containment or concerns and so on, and if we compare it to, say, the Cold War, when the United States and the Soviet Union were in serious confrontation, and in the mid-80s, were really being quite spooked and scared about the potential nuclear war. American diplomacy towards China, I think, is not good at all. I wouldn't say it's not good enough.
Not soon enough.
It's not even good enough. I don't think it's. I put it this way. The way that particularly not just after Trump, but particularly after Trump and the Biden administration's turn, and even if it's just rhetoric towards China and having created such a bipartisan anti-China sort of sentiment, is really not helpful. And if America does not change its tone or style with engaging with China, it is certain that the only path that the United States can take is that military enhancement, alliance, rebuilding, and bringing the military security dimension of the Quad into the foreground. And I find that to be more troubling than the actual what's taking place, or what Jay said, that the inevitable development of the Quad is having a very important foundational security sort of purpose. Did I make sense?
Yeah, in the last discussion, you said initially the United States was a little too soft on China. When Chinese assertion began, particularly in the South China Sea, particularly the restoration, that was in the early part. And now they've overreacted. And now the tone is unnecessarily belligerent, and the style is needlessly hostile. And there is a lack of diplomatic finesse. Now, having said that, that may be true, but the Chinese have not helped themselves through their wolf warrior diplomacy. It takes two to tango, and the Chinese, you can argue, cost the first step.
Yeah.
I agree, but I also but I don't know, Jay Wu, what do you think about what American? I think it was the onus lies with the Americans to pitch it the right way.
Yeah.
China is inherently anti-US anyway.
No, it is not. It is not. But I think I like to look at China this way. I think this is where the conflict has begun. You look at CCP, Chinese Communist Party, and they have their own political schedule. And
just so that our viewers and listeners know, those who are not China watchers, yes, the CCP stands for the Chinese Communist Party.
Yep. And the party has its own political schedule since the foundation of the country in 1949. That is to complete the communization of the country by its centennial in 2049. And to achieve that goal, they wanted to build a country and first strove to become political power in the communist bloc, but it failed and conceded to the Soviet Union, especially in 1960. And then it wanted to become a military power by developing nuclear weapons, which it succeeded in 1964. But, the critical component that is missing is economic prowess, and they tried uh, all and everything to become an economic power, but they failed during the Mao Zedong's period up to 1976. And
I mean, they got the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, both of which were unmitigated disasters.
That's right. That's right. And then comes Deng Xiaoping in 1978, and they adapted, open door and economic reform policy, and their economy started to take off since then. After first 30 years of the reform policy, it was very successful. They rose to number 2 in economic power standing in the world. And then overtaking, Japan, the number 2 position in 2010. And that's when they started to pursue that, wolf diplomacy I told you just mentioned. And that was a turning point for China. And they feel that with their economic, diplomatic, political, and military prowess, they think they can complete the original goals of the country, that is to realize communism in China. And 2 years later, Xi Jinping comes into power in 2012, and he's scheduled to run the country till 2033, which the Communist Party scheduled to complete the nation's building of the foundation of the socialism in 2030 and 2033. And the second stage of the socialist construct is the rest till 2049. And whoever will lead it, he'll be, he would have that mission to carry till 2049. So along the way, before China realizes communism in 2049, in the meantime, it would have to hold on to the socialist way of constructing the nation. And I think this is where everything just made China turn against the United States and the West, because they have to adhere to the socialist way in everything, in every domain, and every aspect of the world affairs.
So that's
Can I just
please.
No. It's just what I wanted to say about when I said China's inherently anti-US is not so much on that emotional level, but it's thought they do have, because it's a communist country, and so they're anti-imperialist and anti-colonialist. So in that sense, America presents the antithesis to what the ideology, the founding ideology of China. That is what I meant. It's not about, America's bad. I mean, that's a different thing. Yeah. But I think that when I meant that that's a given, that America should know this, instead of bringing back a very old Cold War rhetoric, basically, and reacting in a very unsophisticated way of sort of engaging or confronting the past 10 years, at least, of China. I think that is unhelpful. And that is what's worrying.
I know. But just cut the sake of it, had China not been in this period where they would have to pursue socialism, with all its efforts, but it's like the, first 30 years of the reform period. I don't think the United States and China would have that. I don't think we see the kind of China and the United States that we see today. They were very fine the first 30 years of the reform period. But since then, it is because of the Chinese political schedule that they would have to complete this mission of socialism, achieving socialism. But I think China has no other choices, but they got to go their own way. But had China not gone that way, I don't think we would see as bad as rhetoric coming from the United States as today. I don't think the relationship between the two countries would have soured that much. They could have carried on as they did, the first 30 years of reform period. And I think that's very, very unfortunate that Chinese Communist Party would still stick to its original political goals and schedule as they deem themselves to achieve by 2049 back in 1949.
I mean, yes, the pendulum has swung from Mao to Deng, who's a reformist. Doesn't matter if a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice, is memorable and immortal words. And then, of course, you had Hu Jintao, and a period of sanity. But with Xi Jinping, he is quite like pendulum has swung back to control. Xi Jinping thought is part of the constitution. In many ways, he is because he wants control over all aspects of China's life. Yeah. And yet we know that China has a thriving private sector. China has companies. China, yes, the Chinese economy is under huge duress because of the collapse of the real estate market. But having said that, we must remember that China is no longer really a socialist economy. It's not quite a capitalist economy either. It's a strange mishmash. It's a hybrid. It's got a dragon's head, but then if you look closer, then there are four people, as in the Chinese New Year celebrations, jumping around pretending to be dragons. So it's neither fish nor fowl, and they're living a lie, because reality is, if they go back to Maoist ways, if they go back to what they feel is communism, socialism, the economy will collapse immediately. So they have to retain some form of a market economy. But at the same time, they're uneasy and they're unwilling to let go. And in some ways, I have the feeling that China could implode given the tensions, not today, not tomorrow, in 5 years, because it has a demography that is not as bad as South Korea, where you sit, not as bad as Japan, where Haruko sits, but it ain't great. And they will grow old before they get rich. And that will be a uniquely challenging problem for them. And in a society where wealth is trapped in a very asymmetric, not in a diversified way, in bonds, in stocks, but almost entirely in real estate, and with the implosion of the real estate market, the very social contract, the iron bowl that the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, gives you, and in return you give them obedience, that social contract will come out astray. After all, the zero COVID policy vanished in thin air like that.
Yeah, but so they understand this. So during the economic reform period, we all saw that China was going on the path towards market economy, but they like to deny that reality by saying that Chinese market economy is market economy with Chinese character, right? But when you talk about socialism here, it's not only about the economy, but also the society as a whole and in general. That they like to, socialism is basically the government controlling everything, right? And basically, they kind of was losing that hope up until Hu Jintao period because there was no way that they can achieve socialism of controlling, 1.5 billion people back then, had it not been the invention of ICT and the fourth industry. At the advent of the fourth industry, they are confident now that they can control the society as the socialism dogma tells them to. Regardless of
You mean the new fourth industrial revolution where there are new materials where they can survey everything. After all, there is a book called Surveillance Capitalism that tells us how Google and Facebook and Amazon own all the data. And in China, it's the CCP that owns all the data, facial recognition to your social credit score.
Right. So digital dictatorship, digital control has come into play. And now, Chinese Communist Party has stronger confidence than ever, that they can actually materialize their 100 years old goal. That is to achieve socialism and finally materialize communism in this country.
Excellent. So, given that such trends are taking place in China, you see Quad, to bring back our discussion to the Quad is likely to expand and become a quintet and perhaps even more. And South Korea is more needed than ever to act as a bulwark against China.
Yeah.
All right. Haruko, I think we've covered a lot of ground, but one question, and this is my final question to both of you, and that is, all right, we agree that, okay, South Korea should be part of this new grouping we are calling the quintet. Who knows what its name could be Quad Plus or whatever. But the more important thing is, what's the roadmap for South Korea joining this grouping and for this becoming the quintet? And once that happens, what does the quintet do?
Over to you, Jae-woo.
I see Quad expanding to include South Korea would be a natural consequence, because I'm not just talking about talk about it from a military perspective, but also you look at the world economy, global supply resilience, and even for climate change and non-traditional security issues here that the world or the West has to deal with in this particular region. And I think Yoon government is very much supportive of that, supportive to the notion that South Korea should be the member of Quad or Indo-Pacific strategy for all these good causes to preserve liberal international order. And that's why the government has been really careful about, pinpointing our position against China in all these schemes. But it's for the well-being and for the well-being of the people in this region that the South Korea would like to contribute. And that's why the Yoon government came up with this foreign policy idea that South Korea would like to be the global pivotal state, and implying that we would like to make as much contribution as possible to all the good causes. And he would not like to. The Yoon government wouldn't want to exclude China from the scheme if and when China would like to come forward with respecting norms and law and transparency and then playing by the rule in the international institutions. And I think that's where South Korea and the United States stand together on this particular question with respect to China. And so in the end, South Korea would have to be included and play an active role in this quintet or quad or Indo-Pacific strategy, whatever that is, to preserve liberal international order in this region.
Yes. So just very quickly, but South Korea has a strong interest not to antagonize China. It's playing a delicate balancing act. On the one hand, your trading and economic interests are tied with China. After all, Chinese women love Korean beauty products and come for their plastic surgery too. So, and everyone loves Korean soap operas and K-pop.
Yeah.
But at the same time, your security umbrella is with the US. And South Korea is unlikely to take a very assertive stance, let's say, on the South China Sea issue, because that's not South Korea's direct strategic interests. So yes, broadly, yes, they don't want the Chinese to get too aggressive. So when you talk about the liberal international order, what that really means is business as usual, post-war order that we have, wherein people can trade, wherein boundaries are the same. No one wants change to the status quo, and wherein you can avoid war. That is what South Korea would like. But how does it achieve that if, let's say, the roadmap you've given is that as China's competition or as China's threat perception increases, South Korea will be invited in? Isn't there a risk that the very fact of South Korea joining and forming the quintet puts Asia into a vortex for greater tension and war?
Yeah, I mean, Xi Jinping came to power.
No, can I just I completely agree with both, or at least about South Korea joining. And so we go back, as Atul was saying, okay, so South Korea is in a delicate position. And it has risks. That doesn't want to antagonize China. Well, basically, I told I think I said in the previous episode too, that it's the same with Japan, actually. Because our security is far, far more dependent on the United States compared to South Korea.
And you don't even have a military, you have a self-defense force.
Oh, shut up. We did. What I meant to say, so it loops back to do we play, so there's one very important factor, the US policy postures towards the Quad, their purposing of the Quad or the Quin vis-a-vis China. So that has that military, the security component. But as Japan or India or even Australia would demonstrate, yes, China is an indispensable trading partner. It is not like we want to decouple. We just want to maintain the status quo as much as possible. But I think what Jay said about, yes, we want China to play by the rules and also, and really not take everything, particularly in terms of what, say, the 9-dash line issue of all of these very identical.
Well, just very quickly for our viewers and listeners, China had an 8-dash line in which it claimed stuff, and now it has a 9-dash line, and it claims more stuff. And once upon a time, it had a 10-dash line. So 11-dash line. Sorry. So very good. I stand corrected. So we don't want the Chinese to go from 8-dash to 9 to 10 to 11. Please carry on.
No, but I think that this part of however, they say, for example, China might claim that the Japanese or the Americans or others are acting provocatively, and therefore we have to defend our sovereignty, so on and so forth. We all know that's a bit like the reason Putin invaded Ukraine. So, and the Taiwan issue is very, very complex. It's very, very sticky. But I think what we need, the point about it is that we all want, it's not like we're trying to exclude China. It's just that there is a way to engage with China, which, for example, cannot be, America is not helping in that direction at the moment, I think. And it's not the military dimension. It is that, as I said, some of their diplomatic efforts. But when it comes to whether Korea should join in whatever, I think the invitation, if any, and the initiative has to come from Japan. Because there is more of a common ground, and also in terms of our bilateral relationship that's gone up and down, and it is still very contentious in certain aspects. But I think it is also a massive and major diplomatic step for Japan to take and say we need South Korea as a partner. And this, even though we know that, yes, South Korea is de facto, I think it's also very important diplomatically that that signal has to come from Japan and not the United States saying, you join because blah, blah. That's just my 2 cents on this, because it's why I think it's very important to have a stance, policy towards how we are going to create path to bring in an al Shaddad.
Oh, definitely. I agree with you, Haruko, on your argument that, the invitation has to come from Japan, because, people misunderstand that, it is the United States who's trying to, play this brokerage role between Japan and South Korea for the sake of Quad and Indo-Pacific strategy. But I don't think that was the, America's approach. It was rather at the American understanding that Japan might have told the Washington that, okay, this is the precondition if you think South Korea would have to join Quad. That is to improve relationship with Japan. And I think that message came from Tokyo to Washington. And I think that's when Washington realized the importance of, improving ties between Japan and South Korea. Because before that, nobody cared in Washington that, Korea and Japan should improve their relationship, right? Nobody said, nobody did. Yeah. But, Tokyo might have expressed some, reservation about America's, wonder about, ROC US alliance is much stronger than any alliances. So, why shouldn't, South Korea be in it? I think that might have put on the table. And I think the message was clear from Tokyo that, okay, if you think South Korea should come, then they have to improve our relationship with, they have to improve their relationship with ours. I think that was a message coming from Tokyo to Washington. And I think that's when, Barack Obama stepped forward and tried to, intermediate the role, the relationship between the two countries back in 2016. Yeah. And Biden is doing the same thing. Yeah.
Brilliant. So what we understand is that South Korea should be a part of 4+, or the quintet, as we call it. South Korea has a valuable role to play. The initiative for the Quad came from Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. then Abe-san's duty has to be extended by his successors. So the initiative to extend and the invitation to South Korea has to come from Japan. And on that note, thank you very much to academics, two professors with me, a buy one, get one free deal, both Japan and South Korea thrown in. And we hope to see you again to discuss other matters of the Indo-Pacific, other matters indeed, not just pertaining to Asia, but the world. Those of you who are watching us, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, subscribe to our newsletter, which is free, fairobserver.com. Remember, we are a 501c3 non-profit. We do not have owners, we do not have advertisers. So you will get perspectives from around the world, and you will be able to make sense of the world. Bye for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.